With an understanding of basic function syntax and what functions do for us, we are now going to dive into function arguments. Now, arguments are simply the information or data that we have defined a function needs in order to execute. And so these are going to be the values that we send into a function to be processed, manipulated, or have something done with them inside of the function before it is returned to the caller. So let's take our initial example of say your name, this particular function. Let's go ahead and have it execute just once. And let's change what happens inside of the function body. And let's begin to work on what arguments are and how they work. Now, when we went over the basic syntax of a function, we talked about these parens here, or these parentheses. Now, in these parentheses, this is where we define whether or not a function needs something in order to accomplish the task that has been given. In this case, with say your name, we really don't need anything sent to the function for the function to do its job. Its job is simply to print to the console a string that we have defined and set statically. In other words, it doesn't change, it's not dynamic. And when we call this function, all it does is prints this string, meaning that it is self-contained, self-encapsulated, and it really doesn't need anything from the outside environment to do what it's supposed to do. Now, this function, in all reality, has no value to us. It really doesn't do anything for us. It's a contrived example just to show the basic syntax of a function. So what we're going to do now is we're going to show what arguments are and how they are used within our functions and begin to create a function that is a little more dynamic than what we've seen so far. So let's go ahead and let's leave it as say your name. But now, instead of a static string, we're going to go ahead and we're going to have it say the name of the person who is calling the function. And to do that, what we need is we are going to need a piece of data for this function to execute and operate correctly. And that piece of data is going to be the name of whoever is calling the function. So in this case, we are going to need a parameter or a piece of data that our function needs to operate, and we're going to say your name. So that is going to be our parameter that is going to come in when our function gets called. And then in here, what we're going to do is we're going to say hello plus your name. And then we'll do plus again. And then go ahead and say, how are you feeling today? All right, so now when we execute this function, let's go ahead and see what happens. Let's go ahead and start with debugging. And we're not seeing any output. So where is our output window? Nope, I don't want to duplicate those. Let's go ahead and find our output window. Let's go window. Let's go to view. Let's go to debug. Terminal. Output. All right, so let's go ahead and try this again. Let's go ahead and start with debugging. Go to our debug console. All right, here we go. This is before the definition, this is after the definition. Now, if you'll notice, we said that this function requires or should have a value passed in your name. And down here, when it executes, we get undefined. And that is because when we called the function, we did not provide the data that this function needs in order to operate correctly. So we should begin to see that your name acts as a variable inside of this function. So let's see how that works. I can go ahead and do this. I can say Tim and pass in my name. And then if I rerun this, we should say, hello Tim, how are you feeling today? Now all I did was I passed in a string literal. So I literally passed in a string as the value of this variable that we called your name. Now the reason why we have a variable here is because we don't know what the actual value is that's going to be passed in, which is exactly what variables are for, as we learned about in our variable video. We have this variable placeholder, your name, which references a bucket in memory, and then we get to use that reference inside of the body of our function, inside of the statements that we have inside of the body. And here, we're just going to go ahead and append it to a string, and we're just adding some strings together to give us this output. Well, to help us understand what I mean by it's simply a variable that gets passed in, here we're passing in a string literal. Well, I could do something like this, and I can say let my name equal Tim. And now I have an actual variable called my name, which references the value Tim, which is now stored in memory at a memory address that is referenced by the my name variable. And I can just pass in my name, and then when we re-execute, we should see the same results. Here we go. Hello, Tim, how are you feeling today? So here you can see that really all we're passing in is values. And those values could be a variable, or a string literal, or a number, or pretty much anything we want, we can have passed into our variables for use within our variable bodies. Within our function bodies, and used inside of the statements within that. So here, to show that we can use those variables, or those parameters, as many times as we would like within the function body, we're going to go ahead and let's add another string. We're going to go ahead and add another string that uses that variable again. And let's go ahead and execute that. So, hello Tim, how are you feeling today? Tim, you are doing awesome. So here we're using that variable multiple times. In other words, we are using the value held inside of that variable multiple times. So just think of parameters as variables that come into your function that you can then use in your function body. Cool thing is that we can actually use multiple parameters passed into our functions, and we can use those parameters inside of our function bodies to do something cool or to do some actual work. So here we have a function that really does us no good. It really just prints stuff to the console, and in software development, unless we're building a logging engine to log information to our console, this isn't going to do us any good. So let's build a function that has repeatable behavior that we can use over and over again to accomplish a task and have that do the task for us. So we're just going to do something super simple. So let's just go ahead and let's comment that one out, and let's comment these out so they're not in our way, but we still have reference to them. Let's comment these out as well so that we're not getting that extra output, since we understand that it happens after, or that this is just a definition and it's not until we call it that something happens. And let's create a new one. So function, and then let's call this funky addition. Now when we do addition, we need to add, or we need to have two or more numbers to add them together in order to get a result. So let's go ahead and let's take our funky addition, and let's say that in funky addition, it's always 3 or more numbers that have to be added together. We never allow just 2, it has to be 3. So let's do num1, num2, and num3. As you can see, originally when we do it within the parens, we have just that one variable name or that one parameter name. When we have more than one parameter, we just separate those variables or parameters by commas. And that gives us 3 distinct and separate parameters that need to be passed into this function for it to work properly. And of course, we want to make sure that those parameter or variable names are different and unique. And here, all we're going to do is we're going to do some output console.log. And all we're going to do, actually, let's show this without the console.log first. Let's go ahead and do our addition. Let's say let, and then let's do product, or let's do sum, because we're just doing addition. Let sum equal num1 plus num2 plus num3. Semicolon to end that statement. Now we have a summation of those 3 numbers that we are now storing in the variable sum, and we can do a console.log, and let's go ahead and print out sum and see what we get. Now, as we've already seen up here, this is just the function definition. Nothing happens until we actually call that function. In other words, this is the template that tells the JavaScript engine or the interpreter, when it reads through this file, to go ahead and create us a function in memory that we can use later on. This just defines the function. It doesn't actually execute it. And we can see that when we run this, we don't get any output, right? We just have our debugger notes. That's from our debugger. But we don't have any actual execution. It would be here in a white colored font. So now let's execute it. Let's say funky addition, and let's not pass anything in. And let's see what happens. We get nan, or not a number. In other words, because we did not provide the values as parameters to our function call, when it executed, this was undefined, this was undefined, and this was undefined. And when you add a bunch of undefined things together, you get not a number, because it's not a number. And so when we print out the sum, trying to do addition on undefined values, we get not a number placed inside of sum, and that's what we get printed out. So now let's call funky addition, but this time let's actually provide values for it. Let's provide a 3, a 6, and a 9. And let's re-execute. And we get ourselves the output of 18. So here we're seeing parameters being passed into a function. We saw one parameter being passed in and used in multiple statements. And now we've seen multiple parameters being passed in, used in a single statement, but having the summation of those values stored in a new variable within our function called sum. And then we printed out sum to the console so that we could actually see the value happening.